So Sydney Hawke is going to be our first presenter today, and she is going to be talking to us about character design and art development. All right, so go ahead, Sydney, take it away.
Okay, so my capstone presentation is on character design and art development. I'm going to start off with a personal introduction and artistic background. So my name is Sydney Hawke, and I'm 18. I'm currently enrolled as a junior at Guilford High School. I'm extremely anxious and quite shy, but I do consider myself to be very open-minded and dedicated to my interests and hobbies. I was homeschooled for 7 years, and I went through a total of 5 different schools. I did years 3 through 8 at home, switching through different programs, and I did high school my freshman year here at Guilford High School, but the experience wasn't so good, so I did my sophomore year at home and eventually dropped out halfway through. But once the fall came around, I enrolled at a new school and redid my sophomore year and came back here for junior and most likely senior year. For my hobbies, I enjoy making art, whether it's fan art, original art, or surreal art, and I also enjoy listening to music, playing video games, and being out enjoying nature. As far as career choices go, I still haven't decided what I want to pursue, but I do hope to be lucky enough to pursue something that I'm passionate about. So where did I start my art? So I always enjoyed doing artsy things since I was little, but I really got into doing art when I was in freshman year. I saw it as a way to express my emotions and be creative at the same time. I started off making, little drawings of my original character called Tempest, and she was a quadrupedal gray wolf with long blue hair, brown eyes, and ears. And despite loving what I created at the time, a few months into the school year, I stopped drawing her due to the backlash I faced for being a furry. And at the time, I didn't know what being a furry was or is. I just liked drawing animals and wanted to make my own. So that brings me to my next point on what is a furry. So a furry is someone who draws anthropomorphic or talking animals, and they most often have a character that they identify with or like to draw called a fursona. Being a furry is seen as something derogatory and is a stigma that follows them around, most likely due to the lack of creativity and open-mindedness we face in today's society. These artists always receive negative attention and unwarranted hate just for being creative and expressing themselves through their chosen media. As an artist and someone who was subject of jokes suggesting that I inflict serious and fatal harm upon myself, I do wish that school-age children and just people in general would learn to be accepting of everyone's differences and take time to learn about art, as anthropomorphism is a style of art, and I think artists shouldn't be afraid to create in that style. Hold on, let me move this. I'm sorry, I can't see. When did I begin the process to my current art level? So just a little over 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to try my hand at art again just because I knew that I really enjoyed it and I wasn't going to fit in with the crowd whether I stopped doing art or not. So I went back to drawing Tempest and creating other characters at the time. I also experimented with acrylic paints, canvases, Sharpie markers, and a drawing tablet I had. What was it like? Most of my paintings were very abstract, random splatters across the canvas or the occasional nature scene with some motivational quote written across it in an attempt to boost my morale. But as the year progressed, I made more attempts on human designs, monsters, and actual anthropomorphic character that I can call my persona. So we're going to my art development, and here we could see this is where I started in freshman year. This is Tempest, but I eventually retired her in 2019 after I started drawing again because she was just a reminder of what I went through in freshman year and I didn't want to carry that with me. I only managed to find these 2 sketches because I tossed most of them and these were just planned on using in an animation meme, but I didn't know how to draw her. My art style was very inconsistent and I couldn't figure out just how to get it right. That brings me to Kobe's debut. So my art style didn't change much from 2019. My default pose was still, side facing. So about midway through 2019, I realized that lightly sketching my design instead of jumping right into it was very crucial to my development. Just starting out simple with a circle, then blocking in the details and just working slowly was really good. As I went about drawing Kobe almost every day, I decided that I wanted to focus on her design more. So her eyes and mohawk were the main points. Her eyes seemed to be too big and out of touch with her design, and it made it harder for me to display personality and attitude, and her mohawk was always drawn in her eyes, which made it hard to draw expressions. Here's her development. We can see at the top left, that's her original design and 2017 reference sheet. In the middle, we have my most recent 2020 reference sheet, and at the bottom is her 2019 reference sheet. Her design's been pretty consistent. The only thing that's changed is obviously the art style change and the added angles, her piercings, and the change in her ear tear. And this is a piece that I finished yesterday. I wanted to share it just because, I don't know, to display how much her character has grown from that amount of time since I first started her until now. And that brings me to the human development. So here are some early human designs I started. Drawing people was always the bane of my existence, so I avoided drawing them. But when I did, it was awful, as you can see. The hardest thing for me was the anatomy. The body was really hard to get proportional, the eyes were inconsistent, and the hair was just everywhere. Shading and the hands were just non-existent. So my remedy at the time was to cover the eyes with hair and not use references, so the poses were stiff. And the hands were always in the pockets or monster claws, as you can see on the top piece. Here are some more current human designs. I try to draw humanoid designs regularly. The important thing I learned is how to use anatomical references and that all artists use them, so I shouldn't feel ashamed of when I use them. As far as shading goes, on the top piece I started and I liked the way it looked at that point, so I decided to do it that way from that point forward. And on the bottom is the most recent piece I did of the character. It's Kirishima from My Hero Academia. And these pieces are about 4 months apart. And these are some more recent human designs. So with a lot of practice and determination, I felt more comfortable with my art style and ability to draw humans. I have 2 different line styles. So the top one we can see is more sketchy and the bottom's more smooth and refined. There are many things I still want to improve on, dynamic poses, backgrounds, expressions, but you know, it all takes time and I hope to continue developing my style and skills. And that brings me to my original characters. So what kind of world do my characters live in? The characters I created live in a world much similar to ours. The only difference is their technological, medical, and scientific advancements. The story takes place on a mythical island called Calapan, where humans, hybrids, and Highkin coexist with each other. Most members of society fall into one of those classifications, and each person has their own unique set of traits and skills that they inherit from their parents. Calapan is located out in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Japan and California, with a size about 8 times smaller than the US, with their estimated population being around 15 million. HRC and their image. So Calapan is home to the Hybrid Research Center, often called HRC, and this is the only place where hybrids are guided and trained how to use their mutations. They're also the leading company to develop hybrid-specific gear, such as glasses to assist hybrids with poor vision, boots for those who lack support but are built to run, and accessories that allow more comfort and storage. They are also the leading producer in larger, looser, and more accommodating clothes for Highkin, who like the more modern who like the more traditional style of clothes opposed to the modern style. So here we can see the 3 different groups. We have Highkin, which are the highest population, and they make up about 50% of Calapan's residents. They are anthropomorphic animals and possess great strength and skill. They almost always have clans led by the strongest member. They were originally seen as monsters at one point, so they were sent into hiding, but now they're crucial to the development of Calapan. Next, we have hybrids. They're the middle population. They make up about 35% of Calapan's residents. They're humans that possess animal-like traits and appearances. They were originally the result of hiking and human experimentation, and they are now slightly different due to their inheritance of bloodline mutation, and they usually form a pledge with other trusted hybrids. Lastly, we have humans. They are the lowest population. They make up about 15% of Calapan's residents. They're very basic. They have no genetic modifications or trait enhancements. Some of them still view hybrids as unnatural and a threat, while others don't mind their presence, and they are the weakest of the 3 species. As far as Calapan scenery goes, Calapan officials have constructed 150-foot tall borders that surround the island to ensure the citizens are kept safe from not only natural disasters, but unwanted guests are also kept out. Only 4 entrance gates have been built for the wall, 1 for imports, 1 for exports, 1 for security, and 1 for special shipments. The city that lies in the center of the island is the pride and joy of the residents of Calapan, and the area is full of shops marketed for those with genetic mutations, shops that sell clothes and accessories, specifically for hiking, restaurants that specialize in various types of diets, and countless places for all the species to have fun and hang out with friends and family. And that brings me to my original characters. What are original characters? Original characters, more commonly called OCs, are fictional characters or creatures that are not affiliated with a company, but you do own the rights to your characters and creations. These characters can exist as art or as a character in a story, and the concept is created entirely out of imagination, and many people, such as myself, use them as a creative outlet. I have created a few very different and unique OCs. Each is very important to the world they live in, and almost every character I create has at least one aspect of myself hidden in their design. So here we have Yukihiro Hitsuji, or commonly called Tori. She's 17 years old, has a height of 5'8", and she's a chimera, bighorn, snow leopard, and yellow-crowned night heron mix, and she's the main character. Despite being very anxious and closed off to others, Tori is extremely intelligent and strong, but lacks confidence to display these traits. Her most noticeable traits are her 3 mutations. She's an above-average sized female with a set of exceptionally strong wings, a long, heavy tail to assist in balance and combat, and a pair of highly powerful horns. She has short green hair that sticks up on the sides and back of her head, and the tips of the hair on her side of her head get darker at the bottom. She also has a scar on her right cheek and sharp-pointed eyes with narrow yellow pupils. She's most commonly seen in public wearing a white button-down shirt, along with a red tie, a black jacket, a gray skirt, and a pair of black boots. When she's out training on her own or on an assignment, she could be seen wearing a completely different outfit. An oversized shirt with a black and white skirt is perfect for the job. It allows mobility and doesn't affect her speed too much. She also wears gray hybrid assisting boots, a leg drop medical bag, a mask, fingerless gloves, and a chain around her neck to complete her stylish outfit. As far as advantages go, she's very agile and strong. She can use all of her mutations in combat. She excels greatly in speed, stealth, and energy, and she's also extremely brave in dangerous situations and rises to the occasion when a leader is needed, and she's great at wielding weapons. But on the downside, she can be very cynical and blunt. She gets angered easily when things get personal, which causes her to act without thinking about the consequences. And although she has great energy, if she overuses her mutations, she suffers from mutation fatigue due to the weight of each of her extremities. Next, we have Kobe Young. She's 18, she has a height of 5'8", and she is a hyena gray wolf hybrid, and she is the confidant character. Despite her cool down caring exterior, she's extremely protective and cares a lot about the people she loves. Her past has caused her to put on a hard front to protect herself from getting hurt by people any further. So Kobe is an above average sized female, bipedal, digitigrade canine. She has large gray ears with black tips, and they have 4 piercings, and her left ear has a noticeable bite taken from it. She has a long, spiky green mane that transitions to black in the middle, and her body is mostly gray except for the blue tuft on her neck, her magenta paws, and the black stripe that separates her gray and magenta fur. Her tail is split half green, half magenta with an upside-down triangle that emerges from the tip, separating the 2 colors. She is often seen with bandages on her face. This is due to her reckless nature. She almost always wears some kind of sweatshirt along with a skirt to tie her outfit together. She has amazing physical strength, hearing, and smell. Her claws and teeth serve as natural weapons, so she usually doesn't need to carry any weapons with her. She surpasses many with her proficient critical thinking skills and is also very innovative and resourceful, but she can tend to be very stubborn, lazy, and indecisive. She doesn't have very good stamina despite being hiking, and she lacks basic social skills, has trust issues, and can be very emotional, which affects how she acts around others and the decisions she makes. For extra info, she's currently studying design and technology and hope to find a way to better assist hybrids in hiking in areas where they need help, especially those with more than 3 mutations. And she's currently not part of a pack. Although hiking children usually have at least one ally by middle school, she was never able to find anyone who she can connect with, even during high school. So she's usually alone most of the day. And she lives in an apartment type housing complex, which is provided by her school. Next we have Cantotaro. He's 22, has a height of 6'2", and he's a human-panther hybrid. He shares the same role as Kobe, and his specialties are medical knowledge and stealth. Kenta is very intolerant and aggressive toward others. People often avoid him due to his disreputable lifestyle and his tendencies to get into fights. Kenta is a tall and slender male with a sandy skin complexion and has dark spots that plague his face, neck, ears, and tail. He has a long black tail and tall feline ears that stick up from the sides of his head. With the right one having a big chunk missing. He has a total of 5 piercings, 2 in each ear and 1 on the bridge of his nose. He's often seen wearing a hoodie and sweatpants and always is wearing a collar around his neck with a cuff and spikes around his tail. His cat-like eyes are green in color and have a line of pink underneath the bottom lids. Due to an injury to his right eye, Kenta can't see color very well from that side. He does excel in agility, endurance, stalk and ambush techniques, and strength. He's very in tune with his instincts such as hearing and smell, which make him a great hunter, and these qualities set him up to be a great leader in the future. Despite all of his advantages, he has tendencies to be very manipulative, intolerant, self-destructive, and aggressive toward others. He's extremely paranoid of adults, so he often attacks those who he feels threatened by, regardless if they were or weren't intending to harm his brother. And since the dropping out of high school during his last year, he was unable to continue his studies of medicine and stealth training. He had intended to find a career in the medical field to ensure the safety of his family, but the unexpected events caused his plans to fall through. He currently has no set goals in life other than to survive and protect his little brother. And here we have some extra information. He and Kieran currently live in the alleyways not too far from HRC. The area is well lit during the night while providing adequate hiding spaces and cover during the day. Unlike most hybrids, he hunts small game that he and his brother can eat, such as wild boars, rabbits, and birds due to their lack of money. Although he's currently not belong to a pledge, he is content with the idea of it being him and his brother against the world. Next we have a Yashi Yagi, who's 43 and he has a height of 6'8", and he's a human bighorn hybrid, and he is the antagonist. Narcissistic and selfish, Ayashi is the founder and the lead observer of the Hybrid Research Center. To many, he's seen as inhumane and cruel, but he views himself as generous and innovative. Ayashi is a middle-aged man with large horns sticking out from his head. He has slick back hair, orange eyes, and 2 large scars that run across the left side of his face. He's always seen wearing a suit and tie, as he has a professional image to uphold as the backbone of the Hybrid Research Center. Not much is known about Ayashi's advantages or flaws, other than his lust for power and noticeable arrogance, as he does not share much about himself, and he usually displays an unbothered and detached appearance. And for extra information, we have, having produced a child that possesses traits unlike either of her parents, Ayashi decided to conduct research on his child to find out why the mutation had occurred. After years of intense research and testing, he got carried away with all the experiments and later decided to open up his own facility to study other specimens of the same category in nature as his child. Next we have Saiko Kurosu. She's 40, has a height of 5'10", and she's a human snow leopard hybrid, and she's also the antagonist. Saiko is a bit off the chain, but it may be because of her carnivorous instincts or just because she's crazy. Despite her killer tendencies, Saiko is extremely loyal to Ayashi, and she won't hesitate to get rid of anyone who stands in the way of her or Ayashi's research. Saiko is a young woman with long bluish-gray hair that's usually tied back and spikes up around the sides and front of her head. She has a darker skin complexion, bright yellow and cat-like eyes, a pair of large feline ears that get lighter at the tips, and a long, light gray tail that has spots. She's usually seen wearing darker and slim-fitting clothes, as she likes the slender look it gives her. She's extremely agile and possesses unmatched stealth and ambush skills. She has excellent blade skills, and her eyesight is incredible, as it's an important asset for her job. She can be very unpredictable and vicious. She's often ruled by instincts which make her extremely reckless at times, especially when she's caught up in a chase. This can make her very hard to work with in the lab, as she wants to do her own research on her own chosen specimens. Next we have Arson Young. He's 38, has a height of 7 feet, and he is a gray wolf mix, and he's the antagonist. Cold and callous to everyone around him, Arson decided to serve in the military to work for Ayashi, believing that he's the only one worthy of respect. He often puts others down just for fun and likes to make them feel unworthy and good of anything in life. Arson is a bipedal gray wolf with a great build and stands at 7 feet tall. His body is covered in primarily light gray fur, with his chest a darker tone. He has white paws and possesses black markings on his ears, arms, and legs resembling Kobe's. His eyes are large and red with a scar gliding across his left side. His eyes are always slanted forward, giving off an aggressive look, and he's always seen wearing a tactical uniform similar to that of a military soldier. He's extremely hard-hearted, and this makes his work at HRC a breeze. He's above average body size, allows him not to be knocked around easily, and this also allows him to easily push his way through crowds to get where he needs to be. He does have the highest God complex, and he's extremely entitled. Due to his demanding nature and egocentric personality, he's not liked by many and is often seen as unreasonably disrespectful. He also has a tendency to run mad when things don't get his way, and that has affected the life of others while he remains the same. Next we have Hidori Totsu. He's 19 years old, has a height of 6 feet, and he's a human-bat hybrid, and he goes to tertiary to confidant. Having been raised at the Hybrid Research Center for 14 years, Hidori has never seen the good in life. Despite the situation he's in, he's an extremely kind and soft soul who wants to help others and protect those who can't protect themselves. Standing at a height of 6 feet tall, Hidori is a young man covered in scars and tears in his wings, with the most noticeable scar being from his right ear across the bridge of his nose. He has long, thin, and sharp eyes, and his pupils are a shade of extremely pale yellow. He has pointed ears that match the color of his hair and wings that turn just into darker brown at the tips. If not wearing his crop training outfit, Hidori is seen wearing largely oversized clothes to hide his scars and a tracking device around his neck. He has extraordinarily great hearing, great physical combat skills, and he's very strong wings despite the damage they've sustained, and he's also very quick thinking. He can be very altruistic and timid. Due to his kind nature, Hidori is often put in harm's way in order to ensure that others don't get hurt. He's very nearsighted and has sustained a significant injury to his head. This causes him to have poor vision and balance problems, and Hidori is currently not part of a pledge and no longer has any living family members. He doesn't know too much about his past, except that his family had gotten into some trouble, and he was rescued by the Hybrid Research Center, and he currently has no set academic or life goals. Lastly, we have Kieran Taro. He's 8 years old, has a height of 3'11", and he's a human panther hybrid. He's a tertiary character, and he's very gullible, clueless, and scared. Growing up on the streets at age 2, Kieran doesn't function like an average 8-year-old would. He doesn't speak very much and lacks self-confidence, so he depends on Kenta to provide for him. Kieran is a below average height for a child of his age. His hair, ears, and tail are all lighter colors than his brother due to the trauma he experienced. He has spots on his face, ears, and tail, and large green eyes. He's always seen wearing an oversized tunic-looking top, a red scarf, and baggy pants. The only advantages he has is he's good at hiding, and he can't speak or read, and he barely talks, only using small words to communicate, also using chirps and growls. He doesn't know how to hunt or even how to take food on the streets. So that's all I have for my presentation. I hope you enjoyed some of the designs I created, and I look forward to hearing any feedback you have. I also do have an online portfolio where I display my other works if you're interested in seeing my other concepts.
Great, thank you, Sydney. Is there anyone from the audience who has any questions for Sydney? Sydney, I'll start with one. What do you think was your biggest takeaway from this project that you'll take with you in future learning opportunities?
Probably being able to see my growth like laid out in front of me. That gives me a chance to see how much I've improved and how much I can continue to improve if I want to potentially pursue the art career somehow.
Great, thank you. Anyone else from the audience who has any questions?
I have a question. Hi. How do you name your characters?
Sometimes depends. I mean, Tori, the name came to me, same as Kobe. I mean, Kobe based off, the meat Kobe because I like beef. But other characters, their name has some kind of, I don't know the word, like significance to their role and stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I do see a question in the chat. I would like to potentially develop these into a graphic novel. I'm currently have ideas for it. I just don't have the time to work on it. So I hope maybe over the summer I can.
Any other questions?
I just have a quick question there, Sydney. So I love the character designs overall. What kind of goes into as you incorporate these the animal features in a lot of your characters? I guess what goes into sort of choosing new ones? I'm sure there's ones that you are very familiar with. You've used a bunch, but is there anything that sticks out that you kind of like with new features or new features you want to incorporate in the future?
I would like to change things up, maybe give them slightly more animalistic appearances for the more wild ones, maybe the ones in testing. Just try more different things,
Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sydney, so much for sharing your learning over the last year and for sharing your art with us. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Great job. I will make sure that your score sheet gets over to Ms. McDonald, and congratulations again. You did a wonderful job. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye. Have a great afternoon.
Bye. You too.
Sounds good.
You can start as soon as you're ready.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. So for my capstone project, I decided to focus on diversity in classical composition and performance. And I've played in a lot of symphony orchestras and different chamber groups throughout the years. And I've been playing the violin since I was around 6 years old. And I've played very little repertoire by people other than like older white men. And I felt as though there was a lot of music out there that I wanted to kind of explore and learn about, because I really just thought that there was a lack of representation in a lot of what we played in not only orchestras, but also my private Suzuki violin lessons. So I started off by looking into William Grant Still, who was one of the first composers that came up when I was researching people of color and different women. So he was nicknamed the Dean of African American Composers because he was one of the first to kind of have his work published and recognized despite like a lot of racism within the United States at the time. So he was the first African American to conduct a major American symphony orchestra. And he was also the first to have an opera produced by a major opera company, which was the New York City Opera, and also a symphony, which was his first symphony to be performed by a leading orchestra. He was also the first African-American composer to have an opera performed on national TV, and he composed more than 150 works in his lifetime, which included 5 symphonies and 8 operas. And the most famous of his was the African-American Symphony No. 1. And among his other skills of being a conductor, he was also an oboist, conductor, and jazz arranger. So even within like his musical composition, he had a lot of talent in performance and conducting, which probably also enhanced his music. Oops, I don't know. Okay, there we go. So before I play a clip of one of his most famous pieces, there are just some things to notice. So in the past, he performed jazz arrangements for Artie Shaw and Paul Whiteman, who were some of the most famous jazz artists alive in his time. And he was also tutored by leading American classical minds in George Whitfield Shattuck of the First New England School and the French-born electric pioneer Edgar Varese. And he also wrote about the challenges facing America's Black citizens in contemporary society. So a quote about his music is that in between lighter symphonic jazz arrangements of contemporaries like Gershwin or Whiteman and the dissonant experiments of white modernist composers of the time, describing his music. So it's important to look for like different themes of jazz for the jazz arrangements that he was creating, and also his different inspirations from the white modern composers of the time who were generally gaining more recognition. And there's a blend of jazz, blues, and spirituals into a classical form, especially within this piece. So this is just a short clip of one of his pieces performed. So that's a short clip of his piece where you can see sort of the themes of classical music, but also jazz and spirituals, because this does not sound like a typical Mozart composition or anything that you would generally hear performed by orchestras in schools. It's kind of got more modern hints, and a lot of those can be attributed to his influence from his African-American roots. So a second composer that I researched was Lily Boulanger, but it's important to research her older sister Nadia in order to understand sort of how she became to be a composer and how her music was developed over her career. So their father, Ernest, was a composer who taught at the Paris Conservatoire, and their mother, Raisa, was a singer. And she studied composition with Gabriel Fauré alongside Lily. So she was Lily's older sister. I performed a work from Lily that you'll see later in this presentation. But Nadia influenced Lily to a large extent, so it was important to kind of look into her history. She was also a conductor and mentor of the 20th century and began teaching directly after school, but generally overshadows her sister's accomplishments because she was older and because of this kind of fame that she had accumulated throughout the school. She also taught Aaron Copland, Quincy Jones, Philip Glass, and Astor Piazzolla, who were some of the most famous conductors of the time, composers. And I actually performed one of Aaron Copland's work, The Red Pony. He kind of wrote a contemporary style, and his works were very patriotic and often focused on like the beauties of America. She hoped to win the Prix de Rome immediately after school, but only won the second prize, although a lot of historians suspect gender discrimination because she was a woman and one of the few women trying to compete at the time. Other winners of the past included her father and Claude Debussy, Georges Bizet, and Hector Berlioz. She also felt this immense pressure to support her family after her father died in 1900 because Ernest asked Nadia when she was 6 years old to promise to take care of her younger sister and be responsible for her welfare. And she took this very seriously, which stunted her career to an extent because she was so focused on providing for and caring for her younger sister and their family. And she was quoted as saying, "If there is one thing of which I am certain, it is that I wrote useless music." Her mentor, Fauré, did disagree with this, but she felt as though her time would be better suited to taking care of her younger sister and that the music that she had composed had ultimately been a waste of time. So Lily Boulanger is the composer, her younger sister, that I decided to perform a piece from. So she accompanied her sister to the Paris Conservatory, but she had very ill health because of pneumonia at the age of 2 and then suspected Crohn's disease. Her mother encouraged her to write music because she could die any day from her ill health. So she poured herself into studying harmony, counterpoint, fugue, and composition. And she first went to the Prix de Rome in 1912, but withdrew due to illness. But when she returned the next year after recovering, she won the Grand Prix de Rome in 1913 for her cantata, Fauste Hélène. And she actually composed to support French soldiers in World War I, but poor health often inhibited her and kind of stunted her career, just as Nadia's promise to her father did. And she wrote a letter to her friend, Miki Pire, while she was bedridden with bronchitis, and said, "I feel discouraged, not because of the suffering, not because of boredom, but because I understand that I would never be able to have in me the feeling that I've done what I would like to do, but what I have to do, since I cannot follow whatever it is being interrupted for a long time, so that my efforts can be sustained." And she was talking about her ill health and how that often put a strain on her composition and not only a career, because she was quite literally struggling to stay alive. And she still composed 50 works in 10 years of composing, which is extremely impressive. In the life and works of Lily Boulanger, Leonie Rosenthal writes, "This decision provided Lily with the means to decide her own future as much as possible and to show her family, her friends, and above all, herself, that she was capable of being considered a contributing member of the artistic and intellectual community in which she lived. In other words, it gave Lily the chance to develop a positive self-image. Lily's physical dependence on others, especially her immediate family and their servants, was often total, but she enjoyed complete intellectual and artistic autonomy. So her decision to continue composing music despite her ill health allowed her to have an intellectual kind of freedom, although she was often bedridden and physically unable to possess that. So this is me performing Nocturne by her. So that was Nocturne by Lily Boulanger. The next composer I looked into was Florence B. Price, who was born in 1887 and died in 1953. And she was the first African-American woman to have her music performed by a major symphony orchestra in 1933. A critic from the Chicago Daily News heard the work performed by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and declared it a faultless work, a work that speaks its own message with restraint and yet with passion, worthy of a place in the regular symphonic repertoire, which was a big praise at the time because very rarely would a woman's composition be played, even especially a woman of color. She was born in Arkansas and she was very religious, and she brought the music of the African-American church into her music, and she had influences from the likes of Dvorak, Tchaikovsky, and other European romantic composers. This is Fantasy Number 1 in G minor. So another interesting theory that I looked into when exploring the diversity within composers was an interesting theory about Beethoven that was proposed. So there was this concept called the Black Beethoven trope, in which a new album by the group Beethoven Was African claims polyrhythms of the composer's music points to West African heritage. So the thesis was based on the idea that Beethoven wanted to conceal African origins and could pair artists to portray him one way or the other. So it suggests that his father was Frederick II of Prussia, and his mother was one of the king's kammermor or African room servants. This was based on an entry in the 19th century Dictionnaire historique des musiciens. Yet Frederick II was confirmed to be gay, making this theory impossible, but it did circulate the internet through a lot of kind of false articles claiming that it had been proven that Beethoven was in fact Black. And he did have a close friendship with the Black violinist George Bridgetower and composed his most ambitious violin sonata, the Kreutzer, for him. Although this theory has since been proven to be false, it was an interesting thing to look into. And this desperation, this need to paint Beethoven Black against all historical likelihood is, I think, a profound signal that the time has finally come to make a single and robust effort to reshape the classical canon. So Nicholas T. Reinhardt said this and was talking about the fact that people are trying to look for diversity within the most famous repertoire and the most commonly played repertoire in order to make it seem as though the most famous music has been played by a diverse range of composers, whereas in fact, this is just a false claim, and kind of perpetuating this lie is just a last-ditch attempt to pretend as though society has listened to all different voices and listened to all different compositions and not silenced a lot of voices other than white men. And I think that it's important to realize that this kind of last claim is just a very insignificant effort and ultimately does not prove anything and does not help increase the diversity in what we listen to. And this is one of the disputed portraits in which people claimed that Beethoven could be paying different artists to portray him in a certain way, make him look more or less Caucasian. And they were arguing that he did have African roots and he was kind of hiding them. And since there were no pictures at the time, he paid all of these artists to portray him as much more Caucasian than he was. Ludwig van Beethoven had a precise and almost absolute knowledge of the polyrhythmic systems and patterns from the Gulf of Guinea region on the West African coast. Although they are unwritten, I would even say that these traditional patterns were fundamental to his work as a composer. Beethoven has achieved the perfect synthesis between polyphonic modes and tonal system developed in Europe in the centuries that preceded his era, with polyrhythmic system and patterns from West Africa. So this again was from the same article, and talking about how a lot of his music does have influences from outside the kind of European classical sphere, and how that this is what kind of first sparked the theory that he may not have been entirely white. And then it was later, while it was later proven to be false, it is interesting to see how he has different themes from other parts of the country and world. So this is Beethoven's Romance No. 2 in F major. So another composer that I decided to focus on, and I played a duet by her and with my friend Sydney on cello, was Rebecca Clark. So she was born August 27th in 1886 in Harrow, England, to an American father and German mother. She started studying music at the age of 9, attended the Royal Academy of Music during her teen years, and then spent 2 years at the academy, and during those, her 27-year-old professor, Percy Hilder Miles, proposed marriage when she was 19. So her father pulled her out of the university and enrolled her in the Royal College of Music instead. She confronted her father about his affairs and was kicked out of the home in 1910, and then left to fully support herself with her viola performances. She was one of the first female professional orchestral musicians in London and toured internationally, and also composed over 50 works. Sorry, just Just checking. Okay, so I'll wrap this up. I just have one more performance and then I'll be over. So I'm going to now wrap up the presentation just so I don't go too over time. But before I wanted to finish, I would just like to thank my private violin teacher, Mrs. Bryan, and also the Guilford Music Department and Mr. Boats for all of their help with this presentation and all of their help throughout my musical career.
Sophia, thank you so much. You've done a wonderful job. We do have just a few moments left, but are there any questions from the audience that anyone would like to have answered?
I just want to say thank you to Sophia. It's been great working with you. And I think I missed the first part of it. I'm sorry I was on the wrong link, but I absolutely adore hearing you play. And I think that all these composers are so wonderful, wonderful to study. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Sophia, you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much for presenting. For those of you who did join us late, hopefully by next week, all of the presentations from tonight will be available on the Guilford High School YouTube channel. So please make sure that you do go ahead to see that so you get to hear all of the beautiful music that Sophia shared with us. Thank you so much for presenting. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, our next presenter is going to be Lucy Hickmott. Lucy, it looks like you are here. If you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Can everyone see that?
Yep, you're all set.
All right, thank you so much. So hi, my name's Lucy. This is actually my third semester long capstone now. All of the capstones that I've done have been really focused on environmental preservation and sort of like connecting arts and design into that sort of idea of art, into that idea of environmental preservation. I'm going to art school in the fall, and environmental design and like environmental conservation has always been a big passion of mine. So the first one I did was related to architecture. The second one I did was related to graphic design. And for this capstone, I really just wanted to sort of experiment with something fun and something I could do, you know, hands-on. So I decided to sort of delve into the world of making natural dyes. So making clothing dye out of natural materials like fruits and vegetables and plants that I found in my garden. So again, another reason that I chose this, why natural dyes, was as I said, all of my capstone projects have been environment related, and dyeing clothes is a great way to bring new life to old clothes. I'm a huge believer in repurposing old clothes and buying from thrift stores and altering clothes, you know, to make them how you want and to make them more your style instead of just throwing them out. I've always sort of wanted to learn how to do this because I've done this a couple times when I was younger, and it was so much fun, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about it. Also, 99% of the textiles that are made today are made with synthetic dye, which is full of chemicals and can be really, really harmful to the environment because once it's done, you need a lot of water to produce clothing. And once all of that water is, used up, they just put it back into the rivers around where the factories are. And some of these pictures on the right, you can see how detrimental that is to the environment. About 15 to 20% of all freshwater pollution is from synthetic dyes. Garment production is one of the most wasteful things that we do, and one of the worst ways that we harm the environment. Fast fashion, which is stuff like, I don't know if you're familiar with the website Shein or, Runway, or even like Walmart clothes. A lot of those are, made with fast fashion, which means that they're not that conscious or, eco-friendly or ethical when they're making their clothes, and usually the workers are underpaid as well. So the pictures on the right are some pictures from the rivers and environment in Malaysia that have actually turned black, and the top one is it's turned pink and red from the dye pollution of the surrounding factories. So I just wanted to see if there's any way that, I could learn to make natural dyes and, maybe even learn to preserve them in case I wanted to, dye my clothes in the future, dye, bedspreads or sheets, or, do just like a fun tie-dye project. Oops, not, oh dear. Okay, here we are. So a little bit about natural dyeing. It's a great alternative to
Lucy, I'm so sorry, but I think we lost your audio, hun.
project. It produces a lot of really earthy, kind of muted and diverse colors, but there are some things that will produce really, really bright colors, like beets and turmeric are a couple that make these really, really vibrant colors. You really couldn't tell the difference from, a chemical box dye. Moderants are things that are added to the dye that can increase the vibrancy or can change how well it adheres to the fabric, or can even like change the color of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's stuff like metals and powders, other like chemicals, natural chemicals that, you can add that will change things about the dye. Another thing that you have to do is you have to prep the fabric ahead of time to make sure that the dye stays for a long time. If you've ever done like a tie-dye project, I'm sure you've washed it and like soaked it. You can prep it in vinegar or this substance called alum, which again I'll talk about later. And it helps the dye stay on for longer periods of time if you're dyeing a garment that you're gonna wash a lot. Also, dyes versus stains. Some things that you'll find that you'll think will dye like a fabric really well are actually stains, like beetroot and wine are really good examples of this because they make a really, really nice vibrant color. However, they will wash out really easily, and you can fix this by adding moderants that will help it stay to the fabric longer, but for the most part it's going to wash out a lot faster than like dyes, which are usually like plants and flowers. Also, always be mindful of where you're getting your materials if you decide to try something like this. Make sure that you're taking from, your own garden, and you're not taking too much, and, leave some flowers to the bees. Also, some plants can be irritating to the skin. Always wear gloves and everything. And some of the moderants can be poisonous or, harmful to pets and children. So just be careful. On my own. And also acrylic paint is made of plastic, which is not that great for the environment. I wanted to find another alternative. Three different versions of each color in the rainbow. So 3 different colors of red, 3 different colors of orange, and sort of judge which is the best. But, because of the craziness of this year and, being a senior, I only ended up getting to 1 color and doing 3 different versions of that, but I did a lot of research and, I have all, the samples of all the colors and all that. But if I had more time, I'd definitely like to go into it further and do more colors. But here's the research that I did. So for red, the top 3 dyes that I could find were cherries, beets, and red wine. As I said before, beets and red wine are more stains, but if you add the proper moderants, they'll stay for a pretty long time. Cherries, usually with fruits, you don't want to boil it for that long because the color can actually sort of evaporate and it turns into sort of a muddy brown color if you boil it too long. Usually people say to use black currants and it turns into a really light pink or even a dark magenta. For beets, they turn into a really, really vibrant pink if you soak them long enough, or it can be like kind of a light pink or red. Sometimes it's really hard to find like the exact color. Like red is a very difficult color to achieve because, you know, it's harder to find those really vibrant reds unless you add a lot of like moderants, and then that's really, you know, you're just kind of making a chemical dye at that point. But, you know, you can make some really nice light pinks or, you know, sort of almost like purple reds. Like red wine makes a really deep red brown, which is really pretty. For orange, something surprising I found was that a lot of, you know, fruits and vegetables and plants that you'll use for a dye is not at all what you think it's going to turn out to be. For example, avocados, if you boil the pits and skins, it turns into a really light peach salmony kind of color, which I thought was really cool, and I wanted to try that, but again, I kind of ran out of time. White and yellow onion skins, you can boil the dried skins for a few hours. It might make your house smell like onion, but it makes a really pretty sort of orange beigey color. And carrots, this is another one that would be really good to do if you have kids at home, you know, want to do a fun project. You just cut up the carrots, use like a peeler to shred them and boil them for a few hours and you get this really bright, rich orange. You could try dyeing like napkins or, you know, tie-dye or, you know, like a little headscarf. It makes a really pretty bright color. But you do need a lot of carrots for it. It's about 1 pound of carrots for 1 pound of fabric. So the yellow is what I actually ended up doing. So this is, I have some samples later on in the slideshow, but I used Forsythia. And if you don't know what Forsythia is, it's that the bright yellow bush that you get around, you know, March and April, kind of pops up everywhere in Guilford. And you just pick the flowers and a couple of the leaves and don't boil it too long, but you almost like steep it like a tea. And yeah, add both the stems and it makes a kind of like a light color, almost like this one right here. Turmeric was the best that I found. It makes a gorgeous sort of mustardy bright yellow. And I peeled the turmeric and I used the peels. And then I also chopped up the actual root. And then I added powder as well, just to like make sure I could get it as bright as possible. And I boiled it for a couple hours. And oh my gosh, it stained everything. My countertop was bright yellow and my hands and everything, but it made the most beautiful dye. It was really bright. That would be a really fun one to do. That's a really fun one to do too. And purple dead nettles, if you don't know what this is, they're these little purple and green weeds. A lot of people just pull them up. For me, they grow in my garden in excess. They're everywhere. And I wanted to find something to do with them. So I looked up, some of these I looked up, you know, like how do I make a green natural color? But some of them I looked up like, oh, what color would this make if I, you know, turned it into a dye? Because I had so many things in excess. I just wanted to use what I had around me mostly. I didn't want to, you know, take things from, you know, other countries or other parts of the US because I wanted to, you know, reduce travel as much as possible, just use what I had around me. And the purple dead nettles turned out very similar to the Forsythia, that kind of color. For green, you can actually use grass. If you think of like anything, you know, that usually stains your clothes, or, you know, you think, oh gosh, that's, you know, gonna leave like a stain on my shirt or whatever, that's usually gonna be something that you can dye with. Like coffee, I didn't end up doing brown, but it does, you know, coffee dyes. You know, like I said earlier, red wine, grass, you know, you can leave grass stains on your pants. That dyes like a really nice bright green. Spinach also is very similar to grass, makes a really nice bright green. And funny enough, red onions, the skins turn sort of a dark olivey green, which I did not expect at all, but that was something I found a lot. And you do the same process as the yellow onions, just the outside sort of red skins. And then the last ones I did were, the only thing that I would have sort of imported was indigo. Indigo has been used as a natural dye for like hundreds of years. It's what we used to use to dye jeans. It is a flower, as you can see here, but it's also got roots, and it's made into a dark. There's a lot of processing needed to go through to make the dye, so it's not really something that you can make at home unless, you know, you really wanted to devote a lot of time to just this. So you would have to buy like either the kit or the root itself. But it doesn't grow here, but it's a very, very powerful, vibrant dye. It's a natural dye, and it's one of the more famous blue dyes, and that's, you know, it's the plant is the color is named after the plant, so it's sort of like this color here. Also blueberries. If you add if you boil and crush the blueberries and you just dye the fabric like that, it becomes sort of like a red purple color. But if you add baking soda, which is another type of moderant, as I was saying, or additive, it turns into a really nice blue color. And lastly, black beans. You boil the dried beans, strain and add the fabric, and it can be like a sort of blue or purple. It's really pretty, and that is something I wasn't expecting either. And another one I thought I'd throw in here I didn't add, but black wild rice turns fabric purple, which I thought was really interesting. I didn't end up using that one or researching too much into it, but I thought that was really cool. For purple, I got red cabbage, as you could probably guess. That makes a really, really vibrant color. And after you, chop it up and boil it, you can save the solids to eat. Repurposing. Blackberries also are a great dye. You mash and boil them, and it makes a really nice dark red, almost kind of purple. Blue and purple are also some of the colors that's hardest to achieve with natural dyes because they're not as naturally occurring in nature. It's going to be hard to get like that, like very stark purple color. And lastly, violets. For flowers, you don't want to boil them that long because there's so little color. If you boil them, just like even like way too much or add them to too hot water, it's gonna the color is gonna sort of turn like muddy and very brown and yellow after a while. So you just want to treat them like tea, really. You just dip them in the boiling water really fast and sort of steep them in the hot water. Don't boil them, and it turns into a very light purple color, kind of like this one right here. But as I said, I didn't end up getting to all of these. I think I definitely bit off more than I can chew. I can't see myself getting to all of this, in the semester. But I did the yellow ones, and that was a really, really fun sort of dipping my toe into the actual like making of dyes world. So here's my little slide on moderants. Alum is what I use to soak my fabric beforehand, and that just sort of helps to retain the color longer and also keep it a lot brighter. It's the safest and most eco-friendly option. It helps brighten and set colors, and it's originally for pickling. If you've ever pickled anything before, alum is a chemical that helps the pickles or whatever you're doing stay really crisp and not like soggy. Copper, it is mildly poisonous. Don't eat the powder or anything like that. So wear gloves and take caution. But a lot of natural dyers use this because it adds beautiful green and blue hues to yellows and other colors because of the oxidization. If you've ever seen like old copper, it turns green. It does the same thing to the dyes, which is really, really cool and can, that kind of is what gives you those really bright blue green colors, because you're not just going to find that in nature unless you're using indigo. That's pretty much the only really bright one you'll find. Tin is best added in the end because it can make the fabric really brittle. It's also mildly poisonous, so just wear gloves and be careful, but it brightens colors and adds different hues depending on what you're using. This one can sort of accentuate pinks. Iron is also very widely used. This one is not really a powder. You don't find it in a powder. Instead, you boil something that's pure iron in water. Like if you've ever heard of an iron fish, sometimes people with an iron deficiency, there's a little fish you can buy, or it's shaped like a fish, and it's pure iron. You just boil it in water, and it infuses the iron into the water. And so you can like drink it and then, get the iron nutrients. You do the same thing with the dyes. You boil something pure iron in the water, and then the water has that iron in it. And then you, add it to whatever plant that you're dyeing with, and it adds like these beautiful red and orange hues, sort of because like how you see it rust, the same thing. And lastly, chrome. Not a lot of natural dyers use this because it's so toxic. I don't really recommend using it, but it is something that I saw pop up a couple times. It has very similar effects to copper. I think sometimes people just use it because it's cheaper, but it's a lot more hazardous, and I don't know, I wouldn't really want to, look more into that or deal with the, that. Here's a little picture. This isn't mine, but this is something that I found on the internet of like an example of, the first one up here is the natural dye with no moderant. This is when you add iron to it, just the no moderant and iron. This is when you add alum, see how bright it is and how much it retains that color. This is the alum and the iron modifier, makes a beautiful brown. This is the copper. You see it's almost added like a greener tint, or I don't know what that is. It's just really, really pretty. And this is copper and iron. And this is just one natural dye, but because of all these modifiers, you get all these beautiful colors. And that's something I'd like to look more into if I had more time, because I did different dyes, but I'd like to look into more like how a modifier is going to affect just one dye. And then so my process, I started off with just two napkins. I cut up a bunch of squares, more than I ended up using because I thought I was going to do a lot more. I didn't want to do any diversity in fabrics like silk or wool, because then that was sort of another variable I had to test. But it was, I would like to look into that as well. That can be really interesting. The plants were all picked from my garden or local shops. The turmeric was the only thing I think I bought, and that was from a local shop. And as I said earlier, I prepped the fabric with alum. I just boiled the plant material for a few hours. I strained it and let sit. As you can see here, this is sort of my contraption. I had a coffee filter in a mason jar. It was, I didn't really, buy anything. I just sort of made do with what I had. I strained it and let it sit, and then I let the dyed fabric sit in the strained dye, and then I boiled a little bit. The only thing that I would say is that the smell can be so strong. It's really, really earthy and kind of sour. Depending on what plant you're using, the smell, it gets everywhere. I would definitely recommend doing it outside. That's something I would do next time. It's not a very pleasant smell, but yeah, definitely do it outside, or like on like a little camp stove, or have all the windows open. That's something I would do differently. The nice thing though is if you're using most natural dyes, it's not going to stain your hands, except for turmeric. Turmeric does stain your hands and your countertops. It stains everything, but it's a very nice dye. And here are the final results. So you can see the Forsythia and the purple dead nettle look very similar. You can't really tell in this picture, but the purple dead nettle is a little bit more green, kind of gray color, but they both turned out sort of like a light beige. I added a little white square here just for sort of for comparison, but the turmeric C is the best one. It's really bright yellow. It's very mustardy. Again, these pictures didn't turn out so well, but it's like kind of a mustardy yellow. And it was really, really pretty. I definitely tried doing that again, like maybe dye like a shirt or a dress, or like try tie-dye or something like that. So my takeaways were, if I were to do it again, as I said, go outside and make sure I have maybe some more proper gear, because it was very time consuming and sort of tedious, doing it with the gear that I didn't, not doing it with the proper materials and like things that I needed. And definitely work outside because the smell is very strong. I'd like to learn more about moderants and try and experiment with just one dye, sort of look at how, like iron and copper affects, maybe just turmeric, see how that affects it. And then I also like to learn more about the different materials and how they're affected. Like wool up here usually produces a lot more vibrant colors because it retains it so well. And as you can see, this one right here is dip dyed in 2N, so it's a little bit pink here and a little bit yellow there. And another thing that I'd like to look into is making a dye garden if I decided to get more into this. This is really interesting. This becomes something, that you're really interested in. Lots of people create, sections of their garden, or just, anywhere in their garden, planting plants that are specifically used for dye, like, marigolds and black dahlias and stuff like that, matters, which are really, really great for dyeing. And you usually don't see in gardens, but just, creating a whole garden, specifically dedicated to like flowers and plants that you can use to dye things. And I would also like to tie-dye something or dye something like really big, like a comforter or a blanket, because I just love the colors that dyes produce. It's very like sort of neutral and earthy, which I really love. And also learn how to preserve dyes, because I felt so bad at the end of it, throwing away all like this big batted dye, because they'd end up growing mold, because they are natural dyes. I'd like to learn how to preserve them better. Maybe look into canning or something like that. But yeah.
Great, Lucy. Thank you so much. If you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and then I will turn it over. I'll turn it over to the audience to see if anyone here has any questions. I do wonder, Lucy, what was your favorite part of this whole experience?
My favorite part of the whole experience was probably like just getting to work hands-on with the dyes. Although it was kind of like tedious and difficult at some points, it was so much fun. I got to, just sort of experiment, and I love, working with all the colors and sort of seeing how things turned out. And also the fact that like the sort of, even if you did like the same piece of fabric in different dyes like 5 times, it would be different, like just sort of seeing like, how that would be, how that would turn out. And also sort of learning like the kind of funky colors, how, like when you're surprised about, like, oh, I didn't know that that would make that color. I thought that was really interesting. Sort of like glazes, if you've ever worked with, like glazes or pottery, it seemed very similar to me because, you'll start with like the red onion and then it'll turn into this bright green, which is very surprising.
Well, I want to thank you very much for presenting your learning to us. Again, apparently I was excited to hear that this was your third capstone. So thank you again. I will make sure that your scoring sheet gets to Miss McDonald, and you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much. You too.
Okay.
Okay, my name is Matthew Kotzbauer, and for my capstone project, I tackled the question, how has tech augmented clinical pathology? Pathology is the branch of medicine that explores the causes and effects of disease and injury, kind of like what made the patient go to the hospital and what further risks could their injury or disease cause when they're in the hospital. And so I wanted to find out how technology made it so that our ability to do this job now is different from what we could do 30 or so years ago. The first big area that I researched was whole genome sequencing. The idea of sequencing the entire genome, the entire DNA of someone, is that if it's an issue with expression and what they're expressing, it's probably going to be in the gene that that determines what their body expresses. So what whole genome sequencing can do is it can determine an organism's entire genome in a single scan. Previously, it's only been able to be used as a research tool simply because there's so much to scan and the pieces of DNA are so small. But recently, around 2014 to 2016, it's been introduced to clinics and it has had some clinical usage. It is also projected to be of increasing importance in active medicine as our computation abilities improve, as I'll get into. So the procedure of whole genome sequencing has actually been around since about the 70s. And one of the first methods of whole genome sequencing was capillary sequencing. Essentially, the DNA was put in a very small metal tube and a strong electrical charge was applied to it in order to make it so that the nucleotides were detectable. And even though this was a very smart way of doing it, it was also very costly and it was very slow. More recently, high throughput sequencing strategies have been invented, such as Illumina dye sequencing, pyrosequencing, and smart sequencing. And these sequencing strategies, they all have their different nuances, but basically the end point is they have the ability to show you the full genome in a way that's cheaper and faster than what capillary sequencing can do. And so over time, capillary sequencing has become replaced by the high throughput strategies. And if we're talking in a clinical setting, it's probably going to be a high throughput strategy or something like that. In terms of its effectiveness, it's effective in that it covers a wide range and it takes the entire genome. If there's a problem within the genome, it's probably going to at least get it because it takes the entire genome. However, it does, because of the high volume, it does have problems in processing that. The human genome has about 3.2 billion base pairs, and that's a lot. Even though whole genome sequencing has a low rate of error, its high volume creates a large amount of errors, and its high volume also makes it harder to find actual correlations between these patterns that might indicate diseases between patients that have them or healthy traits between patients that have them. Because there's so much, it's hard to compute. It becomes exponentially harder to compute. And when you're dealing with this kind of complex set of data, 3.2 billion is a very, very big number. However, as our computing power improves, the ability to find and use patterns despite these imperfections can also improve. Probably the most well-known law in computer science is Moore's law, which says that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles every 2 years, and the cost of computers is halved, with transistors being things that modify electric flow. And basically what it's trying to say is that computers get more powerful, they can do more computations per second, and they get cheaper. So we can afford more with less money. We can push further ground with less money and make our research even more effective. And this is the series of graph of Moore's law over the years. And and you can see it goes up and up. Additionally, relative to how long it's been around for, the clinical use of it is recent, 2014 to 2016. Therefore, there's still a lot of room for it to grow. There might be an angle that we haven't tried it from yet. There might be a way of leveraging whole genome sequencing that is untapped. And even though it is currently rarely practical in clinical settings, that can very easily change if maybe the way that we compute or look at the data is changed. The next big thing I researched was whole exome sequencing, which is actually very similar to whole genome sequencing in that it uses similar sequencing methods, which we'll go into soon. However, its significant difference is that it has a smaller sample size. It determines a smaller, more targeted portion of the genome, about 1%, and scans that instead of scanning the whole thing. And the 1% that it scans exons, which are parts of the DNA that leave the nucleus and are transcribed into proteins. So if we understand that the DNA in question that we're having trouble with is being transcribed into a protein, then we can understand with fair certainty that it's going to be an exon, and therefore can see it with whole exome scanning at a smaller, more manageable sample size. This here is a graph of how the full DNA is going to go into exons. And this is just how it works in the nucleus, and this is how also we're going to make it work with the scanners. We're going to take out the exons. But you can see pieces of the DNA are going to be transcribed into proteins, while pieces are just going to be left behind, maybe for some other usage, but they don't really do anything protein-wise. And so pieces that are being transcribed to proteins are taken outside the nucleus. And the pieces that are used, they're isolated and transcribed. And so by getting those, we can know that we're only getting the things that are isolated and transcribed. Now, the procedure of whole exome sequencing is similar to that of whole genome sequencing. The first portion is selecting the portion to scan, and there are multiple ways to do this, but it is fairly repetitive, and that what always happens is that we get the exons, and we get that 1% of the genome that is transcribed. To scan, typically the same high throughput methods as whole genome sequencing are going to be used: Illumina dye, pyrosequencing, smart sequencing, and because of the difference in methods, scanning is going to be made faster and more scalable. It's going to be made faster in that there's a smaller sample size, and because the portion to scan is selected before, we're going to have to go through less. It's also going to be more scalable because even though we have to select the portion, we're going to be able to do this process over and over more times because we have to scan a lot less. And when it comes to the biggest part of scanning, we just have a much easier job of that. Now, the biggest pitch on whole exome sequencing's effectiveness is that the sample changes from 3.2 billion base pairs to around 30 to 32 million. This means it's going to be significantly more practical than whole genome sequencing. If I'm taking from a personal example, in C++, I understand that my PC can run about well over 200,000 computations in about 2 seconds. And so if we're comparing the number 200,000 with 30 million versus 3.2 billion, the change is going to be very extreme, and it's going to be much more reachable at 30 million. Additionally, on top of this, this focus, it's targeted toward the most important region. So not only do we have a more focused scale, but we understand that we're probably going to be able to find something within it. It's not just small, it's accurate. Therefore, we can leverage our computation under this accurate, smaller scope, and make it so that our computation is used more efficiently. Now, because computation is used more efficiently, whole exome sequencing is going to be more immediately useful to us because we can use the computation that we have to find advancements and find correlations faster. And that's typically what you see in clinics. If it's going to be a problem with protein expression, you're probably going to want whole exome sequencing because it's so much more practical. You only have to do 1% of the computation, or not even 1%. You only need to consider 1% of the length in a problem where as you increase the length, the difficulty increases exponentially. So in this, people can do more faster with less computation. It's also even currently available commercially. Companies like Gene by Gene, BGI, and Genos offering to do whole exome sequencing for the public at costs all under $1,000, and you send in like a sample of your DNA and they give you your raw exome data. That's kind of how, that's how much easier it is. Because our computation is leveraged more efficiently as well, we can, when we make progressions in data analysis, like data science, ML, AI, we can apply these a lot faster to whole exome sequencing because the difficulty is decreased by a huge factor. And so it's a lot more controlled and it's a lot better environment for experimentation and innovation. It's simply a lot more welcoming. The next big technology I wanted to cover was digital imaging. This is essentially a process where the physical image of an object is represented digitally. So here is a microscope image of red blood cells. A physical image would be looking at the microscope with your eye. A digital image would be being able to take that image with a computer, being able to move it around for your view, and potentially even being able to have algorithms solve for various aspects of it. And so you get all the digital flexibility that's going to come with a digital image. If you have a view on a microscope physically, you're going to have that view once. And even though you can arrange to get it again, firstly, you're never going to get the same precise view. And secondly, that physical movement is going to waste time that you could have spent analyzing the perfect image. Therefore, when you have a digital kind of a digital terminal for viewing it, you're going to be able to have complete flexibility in how you view your images, and you're going to be able to go back to images, fast forward images, maybe even modify images in ways that would never be possible with physical images. And on top of that, you can apply algorithms. And so I saw the two biggest pros with algorithms are security and automation. They can add security to a doctor's procedures, and that a doctor's decision can be run against the decision of an algorithm so that he can check his work in the areas where they might be the most practical to check. And so if the algorithm disagrees with the doctor's decision, the doctor's effort is going to be more targeted toward that space, and therefore he's going to be able to target his checking more towards areas where there are errors. Additionally, by automating tasks with computers and letting the doctor check the computer's results rather than having the doctor figure it out for themselves, the doctor is going to be able to move from a more active role to a more passive role. And so because of that, they're going to be able to take their energy off of the more monotonous tasks that are typically going to be assigned to algorithms, that the algorithms are going to be able to do. Because of that, it's going to put the doctor's energy into the more creative tasks, the more human tasks that need to be done by humans, that are typically of kind of higher value, both to the doctor in terms of like their growth in their skill set, and to the hospital and patients in terms of how many patients' lives they can save. Additionally, algorithms and computers in general can go beyond human precision. And so maybe if you needed to know the specific pigmentation of a color or the specific volume of, say, fluid in a red blood cell, then you would be able to get these exact numbers under a computer algorithm. And even if the computer algorithm isn't completely 100% reliable, it's at least going to be precise in its measurements. Now, algorithms can eventually overtake human precisions in certain areas. This being said, human judgment will still be required to use them. There is a well-known study on breast cancer and how AI kind of could apply to that. And it was conducted by Google Health researchers and Imperial College London. It was that one where essentially an algorithm was assigned to read a mammogram and was put against radiologists. Now, the algorithm performed as well as two radiologists combined, and no singular radiologist did as well as the algorithm. And so even though that is an edge case, it represents potential, and it represents the potential ability of algorithms to kind of check the doctor's work to kind of make it more automatic. Now, it probably will not replace jobs, and it will probably create more than it replaces, and that computers are going to need people to man them, and technological improvements and the assignment of technology will always need people behind it. If anything, though, I can see this technology decreasing the load on doctors, giving them kind of more security in their decisions and letting them have less energy spent on the menial tasks. My next kind of advancement is called Lean/Six Sigma, and these are not strictly technologies, but they revolve around what we do with technology. Now, Lean is a production method aimed at minimizing waste and maximizing productivity. Essentially, the psychology of Lean is every single thing should go towards giving the consumer more value. And if it does not, then it should be repurposed and it should be made so that the consumer gets more value from this process. I've attached a graph of Lean to the top of this slide, and you can see that technology is only this green third of it. The blue third is called people, and the red third is called processes. And so kind of the message of this is that technology alone is not going to give us improvements. It's not going to save patients. What's going to save patients is the clever use of technology and the creation of systems that make it so that, you know, the people behind it are going to be able to use it the best they can. Six Sigma is a system that aims to keep errors 6 standard deviations or sigma away from the mean. This means a 99.99966% success rate, which we cannot guarantee on a human level. However, if we are to make it so that technology checks our tasks and automates our tasks, then we can liken failure rate to the failure rate of the technology. And therefore, as long as the technology is 99.99966% successful and people are always checking with technology, we're going to be able to get closer and closer to this ideal reality and have lab conditions and hospital conditions where as few patients and as few kind of health conditions are lost to imprecision or error as possible. And so tech definitely gives people room to be productive. It gives people room to expand on medicine in whole new ways, but it's the mentality that creates productive use of this technology. My final topic is data storage, and I actually did a small, simple data experiment on this in my next slides. This first bullet point is how I see data storage progressing. We started off with physical storage, where your files were stored in physical files, and in order to get the information for your case, doctors would have to go to your files. Then we evolved to digital storage, where doctors could share information. Information could be transferred faster, more patients could be saved faster because we had faster information. And now what a lot of people believe is going to be the next step is a universal storage among hospitals. So if you enter your information into one hospital and then go into another hospital, it's going to be connected, and it's going to be a part of a worldwide and informed yet confidential network. The primary areas of usefulness to this, in my view, would be antibodies. If you have antibodies against a certain aspect of blood, if you're getting donated blood, it can be detectable sometimes and undetectable other times. Therefore, you definitely want to have permanence in the data registration of that, because if the person doesn't remember their very specific antibody allergy, then they're going to be at risk of receiving blood that hurts them when getting donated that kind of blood. And that is a mistake that could be completely avoidable if data were to be shared and if data were to be universally inputted once it is first discovered. Additionally, medicine allergies can be found via experience and documented. However, a patient can forget to mention them or not be in a state where they can mention them when they go into a hospital. And because of that, that can open up a world of dangers as to their treatment and as to what is the best path to take in making them better, which I'm going to explore in this data project. Now, my data project was pretty simple. I took 10 of the most common medicine allergies, and I used a random number generator to simulate distribution, how how these percentages would distribute among a population of 100,000 people. I built it using a C++ instance in AWS Lambda, but the basic idea is that it distributes the percentages among the people, and it'll track the total number and percentage of at-risk patients. Here are the results I got throughout 10 trials, and you can see that the number of allergic patients every time cleared 17,000 out of 100 people, and the percent every time, since it's this directly, it cleared 17% every time. Now, 17% is a big number. However, it is also just the number of people who are vaguely vulnerable to medicine allergy. It doesn't mean that all of these people are going to be in total danger. However, because of this large proportion of at-risk patients, we can take away a few conclusions that indicate a high level of danger. Firstly, consequences of scale. 17% of people and patients means 17% of all hospitalized patients across all the population of the world, all over 7 billion people. Therefore, when a percentage that high is applied, bad things are bound to happen, even if they are limited to kind of randomness and bad luck. However, the likelihood of harm is higher than random, because if it is found via experience, which a lot of medicine allergies are, and then the patient is hospitalized again and are in a state where they cannot mention it, then very likely they're going to be hospitalized for the same thing. And very likely that same medicine is going to remain the optimal course of treatment for that same thing. And if they are in that serious of a state, then the compound between the allergic reaction and what the patient is already hospitalized for can become even more serious. Because even if it is a mild reaction, if the patient is already hospitalized for something serious, it may become serious or even fatal. If the patient is hospitalized for something casual, it might become something a lot more serious, and maybe their disease or injury now can harm them much more easily, which is something that we never want to see in hospitals and patients, especially due to lack of information. The implementation of universal data helps control this and kind of prevent uninformed errors. Now for my overall conclusion about conducting this research and this project. I found my topics interesting and intuitive. They felt natural to explore. Prior to this project, I thought that I would be interested in pursuing computer science and biology or something medicine related on the side, and this has given me more confidence in those assumptions, because what I found fascinating about this was the kind of computer aspect, was kind of the technological augmentation aspect. And so that gave me more confidence in wanting to pursue that kind of computer science and technological side of things as a career. And I also enjoyed the medicine part of it. And something very valued in computer science is having kind of multiple areas of expertise. If someone understands both computer science and biology, then they're going to be able to hop onto a computer science biology problem and not need to be educated about biology itself. And that is very valuable. Well, that's very valuable to employers. So I've gained confidence in my decisions that these fields are for me. Furthermore, I enjoyed the data project. I enjoyed how it gave me the ability to set something up with my own hands and then make conclusions about how this issue is relevant to the real world based on my own ideas and my own calculations and the results that I got by doing my own work. And I thought making conclusions off of my own work was very interesting. And because of this, I'm probably going to want to explore some subspecialties like data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence that can kind of use this in very interesting ways. And so I'm planning on exploring most of those areas soon. Aside from all that, I highly recommend doing the Capstone project. If you're considering doing a capstone and are in a position where you can do the capstone, I highly recommend doing it, because I think at this time of your life, at this kind of time in your education, where education is usually very kind of controlled it's kind of more routine. It lets you kind of take control in that you explore your own interests. You gain information not only about the project, but about kind of who you are, what talents you have, what you're great at, what you don't like doing. And I think going into, you know, the real world and trying to make something of yourself, this is very valuable information. Maybe you realize you like computer science 2 years before you would have realized that you liked computer science in college. And that's extra time that you have to explore and do projects for yourself. And with that recommendation aside, this is the end of my presentation. Here are the sources that I use to get my information. Yeah, and I guess I open it up to questions.
Great, Matt. Thank you so much. If you want to go ahead and unshare your screen. And then we will open it up to the spectator to see if there are any questions. You've got a great job in the chat, Matt.
Thank you, Theo.
And an excellent investigation. Matt, I'm wondering what the biggest surprise was from this process.
Yeah, so this felt like a controlled process in that I was not investigating things myself. You know, research is very messy, and I'm very grateful that I had so many sources to kind of pull from and have research that other people did before me, and so that I could kind of see how these processes worked without having to do everything myself. I would say that the most unpredictable thing was how many bugs I got in the code for the data experiment, because I had no prior experience with random number generation, and I said, oh, random number generation, this will be easy. But I was surprised at how much finicking around you would need to generate simple random numbers. And I guess that shows that things that appear simple and easy to do maybe aren't so once you start to get your hands on them and see what they are for yourself.
Great. Well, Matt, thank you so much for presenting today and for sharing all that you've learned. I really appreciate it, and you did a wonderful job. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
All right. Bye, everyone. That concludes our capstone presentations for today. We look forward to seeing you at our next presentation.